at some point on your operation, you're probably gonna have an animal die. And then what do we do with that? How do we take care of that? Is a big thing that you need to consider, because like here, this is pretty well a daily occurrence that this happens. But on your operation, it's probably not going to happen very often. So when it does, it could be a little traumatic. It's going to be something that you're going to be a little stressed out about. You're going to have to start dealing with it. And so that to deal with it correctly, so that you don't have repercussions from the way you've disposed of it is a big issue. And the disposal has a lot of impact from the management standpoint, how we manage a disease, how we control problems, and then if we have regulatory agencies, to make sure we fall into their regulations. Disposal started out, most time if we have a routine death, animal gets sick, animal gets injured, and we have one or two. But here in Oklahoma, and like a lot of other states, we have some varying weather conditions that could cause some catastrophic deaths. Tornadoes, hailstorms, freezing ice, the hot, floods. So all of those things could lead to some catastrophic animal losses. And then what do we do with all those? We may be set up for one or two, but what happens if we have, several hundred, or like the guys in Nebraska here recently have several thousand? And so to be prepared for that is something that needs to happen, because if not, the way we may dispose of this will be improper. We're going to hook onto it, we're going to drag it off behind a tree line somewhere, and we're going to leave it on top of the ground. That's really not the proper way to dispose of one. And today, people have cameras. Everybody has a cell phone with a camera on it, taking pictures, taking video, and that's just bad publicity that we don't need. So having a plan keeps us from having those improper disposal events, not to mention having neighbors that are upset because the smell and all kinds of things like that. So how do we dispose of them? For years, it was probably burial. Guys dug a hole, they pushed them off in it, and then that was the way they took care of it. If you're going to bury a mortality event in a carcass like this, you need to have a spot selected that is in the right area, the right soil type, up kind of on a hill. You don't want to be in a floodplain. Unfortunately, many times the site that most people select is the site right next to them. They pull up, the animal's dead here, they dig the hole right next to them, and they push it off in it. Well, that may not be the best place for it. Also, we want to make sure it's at least 300 feet away from a water supply, open water supply, so that you're not having issues with that. Landfills will accept some carcasses. A lot of them will require an appointment be made to deliver them, and then somewhere probably between $20 and $40 a ton for the disposal fee. So you're spending some more money, and then it's not helping the landfill, it's just adding contents to that landfill, filling it up even quicker. Probably the one that was used several years ago was rendering. There was a lot of rendering companies, and those rendering companies at one time would pay. They would pay you for the animal, and now it's got to the point now where you have to pay them if you can even get them to come out and pick them up. The concern with that is biosecurity. Where is the vehicle that's picking those up? Where has it been? What does it have in it? What are you possibly bringing onto your operation, bringing that vehicle onto your operation? So the one that we're going to talk the most about today is composting. Composting is, for the small producer, tends to be the most logical form of mortality disposal, because it's something that we have readily available to us. It's easy to set up, it's easy to maintain, And then at the end of it, we have a usable product made from something at this time it's unusable. So what we need to design a compost pile, we need a carcass, first of all, and that's a nitrogen source. And then we need a carbon source, which for the carbon source that we tend to use and has worked the best for us is wood shavings, cedar shavings, wood shavings that they use because we have a ready supply of them. The fairgrounds where we just left from this morning, every time they have an event, a horse event or livestock show, those people exhibitors bring in shavings to bed those stalls down with. And then when they leave, that's all cleaned out, has some manure, some urine in it. They're piled up. And then those piles, the contents are just free to whoever wants to come pick them up. They'll load them for you. And the shavings from that tends to be one of the better carbon sources for our compost pile. And then the microorganisms that make all this work. The way this works is we add all three, the microorganisms are in the soil, the carbon source, and then our carcass. The microorganisms will start to break down the carbon source. The carbon source being the shavings, and as they break that down, the byproduct from that is heat. And so this compost pile, within a day or two after we started it, will be at a temperature somewhere between 140 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So it'll keep that temperature for about 90 days. At 90 days, this pile will probably start to run out of oxygen. At that point, the temperature will start to fall. Once it gets down below about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, we're going to open it up, let the oxygen back into this pile, and then the temperature should go back up for another 90 days. So that tissue on this animal is breaking down. The bones are becoming very brittle. By 150 days, most of the soft tissue is completely gone. All the small bones are about dissolved or gone, and the large bones are pretty brittle on these calves like this. In the poultry industry, where they really started this, typically in about 90 days, they didn't have anything left because fine bones of those chickens or turkeys, whatever they were composting. But these, it'll take a little longer. But we want to use a good heavy carbon source. Hay doesn't tend to work as good. Hay tends to be a little too fine of a carbon source. And so we get a real big spike in temperature real quick, and then the temperature goes down to nothing too quick, and because it uses that carbon source up very rapidly, so we get a big spike in temperature, but it doesn't sustain it long enough. We'll start out with our compost pile. We'll want to put a base down. The base that we've used here was some hay, straw, and some shavings. You'll want about 2 feet of a base, and then we put the carcasses in and 2 foot of compost on top of that. And then we put a layer of dirt on top of all that to keep it from drying out. The reason the dirt is on top is it keeps the compost, the shavings, from drying out and blowing away. And it helps to preserve the moisture in here. You want this compost pile to be about 50% moisture. We tend to use a long stem thermometer. You can buy them at a lot of hardware stores or something. They're pretty long, big readable dial on them, and you can just mash them into this pile in 4 or 5 places, get a temperature reading, make sure that you're above that 140. If you fall below that, then most time it's time to turn them. And so a long stem thermometer can come in handy. Most time we want 50% moisture in this pile. That's pretty easy to achieve. Very seldom do we ever have to add rain to them. We're gonna get enough rain here and there. Even in the summertime, this compost holds moisture very well, so it doesn't dry out. The shavings do a good job of maintaining that. So an 8 foot pad is good for calves, 10 foot pad for cows, and then 12 foot for larger livestock like horses or something like that. We put a fence around this. I've seen feed pallets, but panels. And the reason for this is not to keep scavengers out, it's to keep the shavings contained so that they stay mounded up good and they don't get scattered out. Because if they go to scattering out too far apart, then you end up with losing your heat. And so keeping a good tight circle around your compost pile where you can pile those shavings up a little higher. And we can even add more livestock on top of this pile and keep adding shavings. So we can keep filling up in areas of this. So this thing, we can continue to use it for multiple animals. We're gonna add these two that Dr. Barker just did the necropsies on. They'll be added in here in just a second because it needs to be turned for oxygen anyway. We're just gonna add them right in and they're just gonna become part of the process. At day 150, all the pathogens should be destroyed in here. You shouldn't have to worry about any diseases, any pathogens like that. And then you can take this, apply it back to your land as a soil amendment, and you have something very usable. It is a good usable situation. It's very easy to have everything you need. Most of us have everything that you see right here, a few T-posts, some cow panels or some boards or something, just to hold that compost up. You want whatever you put up against it to have, like these, to have some airflow through them. You don't want solid boards, you don't want metal or something around it. You want the air to be able to come in and to keep that pile working, the aerobic microbes working in there. So we're gonna open this pile here in a little while. If you guys wanna stick around, they're gonna bring a tractor up here, they're gonna open this up. You can see kind of what's in here, but most time it's gonna be femur bones, rib bones, maybe some teeth, but because we've been in here about 90 days, so a lot of your fine bones are already starting to break down. Any questions? We put 2 in there. That's a good question. I appreciate you bringing that up, because the way we put them in here is another thing that you probably should know. We put 2 in here when we started. The best way we found is to tie them. If you don't open them like they're open here, you want to tie those feet together to keep, a foot from coming out of the pile or disturbing the pile. If you tie those feet together to kind of keep them bunched up, they stay together better. And then we put them back to back in the center of the pile, feet facing out, and that keeps most of the animal toward the center of the pile where you got most of your shavings. If you put them feet to feet, try to lace their feet together, then you got their bodies on the outside and there's more of a chance that they come uncovered. So another thing that you may see as this pile works, this one didn't because these calves were pretty small. You may see the pile kind of cave in the top. When that animal starts to decompose good and starts to compost, that pile may kind of sink in and you may have to come back and add a little bit of shavings on top just to keep that pile built up and working right. But thanks for bringing that up, because yeah, you can add, we had 2 in here and there was probably room to put 2 more in there when we put the pad down. We could have put 2 more in there pretty easy. But we're gonna add these 2 in here and they won't take up much room either. But I mean, these calves, if you got up to something like 600-700 pound calves, you're gonna probably start seeing you're gonna use up most of this pad size for one of those. But these little 200 pound calves, 275 pound calves, they're not gonna take up much room. This works really good for like these, but small ruminants, those guys, sheep and goat people, poultry people, these are very useful for some of those operations as well.